What is up, fantasy people? You are back with the True North Fantasy Pod. Of course, we are presented by Monkey Knife Fight, and I am Trav. I am in Dirty Laundry Studios 2.0. As always, co-hosting and West Coasting with me. The newly minted Fantasy Pros #4 most accurate ranker for this past week 6. Wasn't going to let you skate by without mentioning that, my man. So big congrats on that. And that would be Tyrell McLaughlin. How are you doing, my man?
I am living the dream.
Of course. Again, big props to you on that #4 ranking this past week. You were the #1 ranked quarterback ranker this week. And so that's beautiful. You see that belt behind me. Ty is rocking the quarterback ranking belt for this week, and #4 on the week. It's pretty cool. That's kind of why we do that, is to be accurate and track our accuracy against the best. And so you got a nice little shout out from Fantasy Pros on that, and your name was up there with some of the GOATs. So that was really cool to see. If anybody wants to check out your rankings, Ty, they're up every week at truenorthffb.com. And all of the cruise content can be found on the site and the socials. We can be found on Twitter at truenorthffb. It's the same on Instagram, and True North Fantasy Football on Facebook. Got the gear on the site as well. Just want to always give that a plug. Make sure that if anyone wants to get swagged out like we are, go to the website and check out the shop, and you can get some of that wicked gear powered by Viridian Global. And lastly, just make sure you subscribe to this channel. This is we are the TNFF network on YouTube. We have 4 shows per week. Our show is directly followed up by the Sons of DFS, and then the Point After on Fridays. And then we, of course, have the Gold Jacket Boys on Tuesday nights, getting everybody prepped there as well. So we're just doing a lot of good work there. We really like when we see people leaving comments, leaving likes, and we just like seeing that audience grow. So make sure you get over there and subscribe to that channel, set the alerts for those notifications, and then load us up to every audio platform that you have as well, because we are on there as well.
Yeah, and make sure everybody is signed up for fantasypoints.com. Obviously, the best bang for your buck out there, in my opinion. The 21 True North 10 promo code will get you an additional 10% off of that subscription. And, it's just the best advice from the best analysts in the business. And you can harness all the buffet of knowledge and analysis on top of just a litany of stats, tools, and other content and goodies. DFS fans know that the slate is fully broken down there by multiple people in very, very great detail, and you get projected ownerships, everything you need to know for DFS going into each week. I kind of swear by their odds board as well. It's everything betting done by Tom Brawley, game picks, trends, all that good stuff, player props, which I think are actually done by the legendary John Hansen. But it's also just the best way to support us as well. So go over to fantasypoints.com, 21 True North 10, all caps, and you won't regret it.
Yeah, man, it's an amazing crew over there. We've loved having them on the podcast. They're big supporters of us. They've done nothing but support our show, and that's thanks to all the boys and Ben over at Fantasy Points. So tonight, Ty, we are going to pitter patter. Lots to talk about. It's week 7. It's the midseason push. Everybody's kind of figuring out whether their rosters are contenders or pretenders. I know I'm evaluating a lot of stuff in a lot of my leagues, especially the dynasty leagues, to see where we're going. But tonight we're going to kind of get everybody ready for week 7 and on. So there's a lot of situations that have been changing. And that's kind of something that if you've listened to our podcast loyally, you'll know that we like to take changing situations for players, for teams, what have you. And we like to break those down and dissect them and see what they mean. And this show is no different, essentially. We're going to go through a bunch of players and talk about whether they are for real or whether we should not buy into the hype so much coming down the stretch here, Ty. And I'm going to kick it off with a group of wide receivers, if you don't mind, my friend. And the first one. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say I totally agree with your point, and I like kind of picking apart these situations. I think one of the main components of fantasy football is staying ahead of the market and sifting out the trends and making sure you land on the right side of that situation or the final outcome. You want to get ahead of it and try and predict it as best you can.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so, this might be a good time to go put some trade feelers out there, kind of restock for that run. And hopefully this episode can help you out with that. The first guy I'm going to start with, Ty, is to me probably one of the biggest steals of the draft so far. This is a guy that you could get in a lot of cases in the double digits of your drafts, and he's currently the PPR wide receiver 4 on the season at this point, and that would be Mike Williams over in Los Angeles with the Chargers. And he's definitely turned a corner with Justin, the Herb Kid Herbert, coming in and kind of taking over that offense. We love the downfield work from Mike Williams. That's what he's always been known for. And that's been true this year as well. He's got the 4th most deep targets, 3rd most deep receptions on the season, and the 2nd most deep touchdowns. So that's safe for him. You know what I mean? That's definitely something that kind of goes along with him and we expected. But this season, he's been getting volume, and that has really unlocked the upside for Mike Williams. His previous career high in targets is 85, and he's going to smash that out of the water. He's got 53 targets on the season so far. So easily, especially with the 17 games, he is going to just hammer that previous high. Double-digit targets in 3 of those games, which is pretty sweet. And it's kind of interesting that he had only done that in 3 games in the 4 seasons prior, Ty. So Mike Williams is just kind of setting career records all over the place this season. And I think it's been pretty sweet for fantasy football. What do you think about Mike Dubs, though? This is something I know in when Justin Herbert went to the Chargers, we were kind of hoping this could be the surge for Mike Williams, but we didn't see that until year 2 with Justin Herbert, which is totally fine. But do you think he is past Keenan Allen for good on this? Maybe not necessarily on this depth chart, but in our fantasy hearts, is he for good a better asset than Keenan Allen? Because Keenan Allen is perennially dogged on, but he's been nothing but steady over the past X amount of seasons. And so, are you ready to say that yet?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think maybe you could put them in the same tier right now. It might almost be a coin flip at this stage of their careers. Both are kind of borderline wide receiver 1s to me, like high-end wide receiver 2s, I guess, in the same tier. But there's definitely a floor versus ceiling debate to be had between the two. And, we've seen the ceiling play out for Mike Williams so far. He's the wide receiver 4, like you said, through 6 weeks. And Keenan Allen, on the other hand, is the wide receiver 25 in PPR. But there's still more volume headed Keenan Allen's way for the time being. Like Mike Williams has just done much more with his volume, and he's seeing much more valuable targets, I would argue, too. Like Keenan Allen still leads the team in targets and receptions, but his 10.7 yards per reception just pales in comparison to Mike Williams, who's averaging over 15 yards per reception. So he leads the team in receiving, and Mike Williams has scored 6 of the 7 touchdowns by wide receivers for the Chargers this year. And, is Mike Williams a top 5 wide receiver is like the argument you're kind of seeing out there. I think top 5 is pretty bold, and probably ignoring some likely touchdown regression that he could experience. But I think, and it also assumes maybe, Trav, that Austin Eckler continues to kind of underwhelm in the passing game as well. But the volume and the type of volume is just really appealing. He's top 10 among wide receivers in targets and air yards. And man, what Mike Williams has done in 2021 is just not to be besmirched in any way. In 15 games last year, Mike Williams had just 4 top 24 finishes for fantasy owners. He also did that just 4 times in 2019 and in 2018. Last year, Mike Williams was a top 12 wide receiver in 3 of 16 games. And through 6 games this year, Mikey Dubs has equaled those totals. And his 3 top 12 finishes matches his total over the previous 30 games or something. So it's pretty remarkable what he's done this year. And I just expect him to continue to hit, because there's Mike Williams and Justin Herbert's skill sets are just aligning perfectly. I think they just align perfectly, and predictably, at least from TNFF, I kind of railed against Keenan Allen this offseason because he's stuck seeing some of the less appealing volume, I think, in this offense. He doesn't really benefit from some of the advantages that Justin Herbert provides the offense, in my opinion. And, meanwhile, the ADOT and the lack of explosive element is still kind of apparent in Keenan Allen's game. So Mike Williams, I think, is hard to call a definitive wide receiver 1, because you have big shots like Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, DJ Moore, Vikings guys, Cowboys guys, CD Lamb's coming on really strong. I probably have DK ahead of him. Definitely when Russ is under center. But Mike Williams is a name that I think does come up towards the end of that conversation, alongside names like maybe Terry McLaurin, Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receiver. So Mike Williams, I'd say, is wide receiver 1 back end, or a nice wide receiver 2, who is kind of offering us a pretty awesome weekly ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, he does come with a floor since the Chargers are actually running the ball a ton. And we even saw last week that like he put up under 5 fantasy points in a game against the Ravens where LA was they were chasing points all game. They just couldn't do anything. So a bit of a feast or famine complex at play where Mikey Dubs has put up, I think, over 22 points in PPR 4 times this year and under 5 in the other 2 matchups.
Yeah, that other matchup you're talking about was just over 2 points against the Raiders. So not good, Bob. Definitely that floor is there. I think why I think he's going to have a little more consistency, and I'm not putting him in that top 5 conversation rest of season yet, just for the reasons that you said. The guys around him are just like locked into that. And I think he needs to earn a little bit more of our trust. But you mentioned the air yards, Ty, how he's top 10. That is still with his average target depth coming down almost 3 yards since last year. And so he's averaging just over 12 yards or 12 air yards per target, whereas he had over 15 last year, I think over 18 the season before. And so that has come down a little bit, but we have seen the increased volume there, and the yak is way up for him. He's actually already almost crossed his season high in yards after the catch, which is something that we didn't necessarily know he had in his repertoire. He was kind of one of those catch and fall down guys who falls down really, really hard when he catches. So it's cool to see that additional piece to his game. He's got 179 yards after the catch, where his previous career high is 200 in a season. So just kind of a new facet that I think, like you said, Justin Herbert's skills have aligned with very nicely to unlock some of that Mikey Dubs. So back end top 12 feels like a good spot for him. Another guy who is much newer on the scene, Ty, and we're going to keep her moving along the wide receiver ranks because there's a lot of new faces this year. I was looking through the top 12, and there are a lot of new faces across the landscape. And so it's going to be interesting to dissect whether these are the guys that we're going to hitch our wagons to. And the next guy that I want to talk about is Jamar Chase, because the Bengals passing game certainly has hitched their wagon to him. We were actually talking about Mike Dubs and his deep work. Jamar Chase actually is the only guy with more deep touchdowns than Mike Dubs, which I thought was kind of cool. He's currently the wide receiver 7 and clearly has taken over top dog duties from Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins in Cincinnati. But he's been mega effective, Ty. He's outside the top 30 in targets and receptions right now is Jamar Chase, but he's sitting 4th in both receiving yards and touchdowns among wide receivers. So I think that's pretty cool. He's also the only guy with at least 35 targets to have over 20 yards per reception. So even with the plentiful volume, he is being efficient on that. So Mike Dubs, we're talking about him top 5. Is it too soon to have Jamar Chase in our top 5 rest of the season? Or are you ready to crown him, Ty? Because if you want to crown him, then you can crown his ass.
Yeah, crown his ass. Absolutely.
Don't let him off
I
the
do
hook.
think I do think he is a top 5 wide receiver. And it's fitting, with the Bengals here. But yeah, I think the most interesting component to the Wild success here early on is that the Bengals offense has actually looked a bit different than we anticipated.
Mm-hmm.
Like the offensive line has been exponentially better than I thought it was going to be, allowing them to kind of set up those deep balls. And just overall, they've been a more competitive team than Vegas and ourselves thought they would be.
Yeah.
And that also means that they've run the ball more and they've been just a way slower offense than I think we had hoped. And all that has told me a couple of things. Jamar Chase is as advertised, an elite wide receiver day one. And the chemistry between him and his college quarterback, Joe Burrow, has been as advertised as well. But another takeaway, I think, even better, is that if the Bengals do find themselves chasing points in games more often going forward, this volume could go way up, and that would compensate for any downtick in efficiency that Jamar, that he might experience. And on RotoViz, he is the wide receiver 1 overall in fantasy points over expectation. So it just lends to what you were talking about, and that's efficiency. And if you worry about that, sometimes like it has to come down to a lot of deep passing efficiency and touchdowns. These are things that sometimes can regress over the season, but he's been so efficient. He's averaging almost 16 air yards per target right now. Almost half the team's air yards have gone to their rookie wide receiver, Jamar Chase. So, and just to shed light on like how much room this offense has to grow in terms of volume, like only Brandon Cooks in Houston has a higher percent of his team's air yards, but Jamar Chase is like 12th or 13th, depending where you look, among wide receivers in total air yards. And there's kind of a similar thing at work when it comes to the touchdowns. Like Jamar Chase has seen basically zero work in the red zone this season. And part of that is Jamar Chase has 3 touchdowns of 40 plus yards, a league leading statistic. But part of that is team driven. Like the Bengals are dead last in red zone trips per game right now. They just haven't found themselves at the goal line as often as a lot of other teams. So even though Chase is scoring at will from deep, he has just 3 end zone targets according to PFF. 34 players have more, but those 3 end zone targets account for 50% of the Bengals' total end zone targets. So basically, Jamar Chase has seen half of the Bengals' air yards, half of the team's end zone targets. Meanwhile, Burrow is ranking like 25th in intended air yards, and Bengals are dead last in red zone trips. So I think we should be even buying high on Jamar Chase. He's done what he's done off the back of sheer talent, I think. And there's a range of outcomes where the situation becomes awesome for a wide receiver. So I think he's a top 5 wide receiver going forward for sure. And I think he has like wide receiver 1 overall potential, maybe, if there wasn't such beautiful names at the top like Tyreek Hill and Devontae Adams.
Totally. And I think, he's next season is going to be one of those names. And I think it's been really cool. I mean, for me, I didn't really expect him to wrestle this 24% target share away from Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins, but he's done so. And so good on him for that. It's going to be interesting because this is one of those passing games that we've said that we want pieces of big time. And it's crazy that it's operating more off of efficiency than it is off of volume like it did last year and like we expected it to. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned about the end zone stuff, because I think like if we see more red zone trips, I think we're going to get a lot more T. Higgins and a lot more Joe Mixon coming into play. So I think some of these big touchdowns from Jamar Chase are just something that's going to be a staple of his game. And that's kind of helps him from being capped by those other guys, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Because with more red zone trips, I think T. Higgins is really going to make himself known. And that's something that I was kind of hoping for him this season. But of course, he hasn't necessarily been healthy. But I think Jamar Chase has just been, everything, like you said, as advertised, and a good top 5 overall pick by those pesky Bungles.
And Kyle in the chat asks if he's a round 1 pick next year. I think debatable in redraft and season long and best ball, but I think in dynasty leagues, there's no doubt about it. It'll be a first round pick next year.
I think so too. Yeah. I think for season long, he's going to be one of those guys who's right on the cusp where people who are saying like draft him top 10 are just trying to get that, a little bit contrarian kind of top 10, kind of call that additional breakout. But for Dynasty, he's locked in, and I haven't updated my rankings with him yet, but I think he probably would be a top 12 asset for me in Dynasty. This guy would not be that for me and was not that for me coming in, Ty. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts, and that's Devos Samuel. Currently, he is the wide receiver 8 on a per game basis. Remember, they just had their bye, so they're coming off their bye. On a per game basis, Devo is the wide receiver 3. And of course, like I said, I haven't been a huge fan of the upside that I thought he presented previously, but he has proven me wrong, and you cannot deny the work for Devo so far. He has 8 or more targets in every single game, which I thought was very hard to fathom with the expected volume that I saw the offense having, as well as George Kittle and Brandon Ayuk potentially having. But Devo just continues to operate in that heavy target fashion for the Niners. Obviously, he's a yards after the catch machine. We knew he was going to be that. A lot of people say he's like a running back at the wide receiver position, but they've actually added some air yards into his role this season, Ty, which is something that has been a pleasant surprise for the people who have him in their lineups. And he's just been unlocked by Kyle Shanahan. I think some injuries are a little bit of a factor there, but you can't really deny what's been happening. But is Devo actually a top 10 option for you the rest of the way? Is he actually that, or do you think, do you think the quarterback position matters? Do you think Brandon Ayuk's going to have something to say about that? What's your take on Devos Samuel going forward?
Yeah, I mean, and just a really quick note, I saw Coach Craig mention Mike Williams' injury-prone label kind of was brought up in the chat there, and we have Devos Samuel here. So 2 of the revelations at the wide receiver position this year definitely came with heavy injury-prone tag, so to speak. So that's always baked into these prices, and they're always it's kind of a good rule of thumb to target those players, in fact. So is Devos Samuel wide receiver 1 or top 10 wide receiver? I think I have him ranked as such this week in the Sunday Night Football showdown against the Colts, who are actually a top 10 matchup for wide receivers in fantasy this year. It's also looking like it will be Jimmy Garoppolo playing quarterback for the 49ers coming off of their bye week, as you mentioned. And I think Jimmy G and the bye week both bode well for Debo this week. Debo actually scores, by the way, 33% more fantasy points with Jimmy G at quarterback compared to the other quarterbacks since the beginning of 2020. And in the short term, with George Kittle sidelined, I think it's hard not to consider him a wide receiver 1. I think I would want names like DJ Moore, even Mike Williams over Debo, just because of the nature of the offenses that those guys play in. And if we look at what is and isn't sustainable for Debo, like his catch rate is down, but that is in large part to what you mentioned, that increase in his average depth of target. In 2020, he had a seriously fantastic ADOT for a wide receiver. His targets traveled on average just 2.2 yards through the air last season, which is just incredible. His ADOT's up to like 8.2 now. So that's incredible, especially when he's sustained his incredible after the catch metrics, right? And but that average depth of target is still low. I mean, he barely cracks the top 40 in wide receiver air yards right now, barely, but he's 5th in receiving yards, right? And it is all about what Debo can do with the ball in his hands. Like, it's borderline record-setting stuff. I think he's averaging a jaw-dropping 9.7 yards after the catch per reception in his career. Like, he gets almost 10 yards after he catches the ball all by himself every time. So it's just insane. And again, in the short term, there's no reason to think that this monopoly on the volume in the San Francisco 49ers passing game won't continue. Like, Debo is seeing almost 1/3 of the team's targets coming out of their bye week. It's how Debo, who we kind of, like you mentioned, considered more of a foreplay in fantasy, has been able to yield such a high ceiling this year. Like we saw in weeks 1 and 4 against the Lions and Seahawks, respectively. He put up like 33 plus PPR point games. So incredible. So yeah, wide receiver 1 right now, but there could be a sell window that emerges when Kittle is set to return, and we need to keep like a quarterback carousel in mind in San Francisco as well. Maybe the running game gets going more as well. So as much as we love Shanahan and how he's using Debo, and as much as he's benefiting from play action, and that will continue, it's just hard to bank on Yak at that level. And even from a guy who's proved it on a crazy scale, and he plays in a scheme that provides a lot of Yak for wide receivers. So I don't know. I think there's a good argument to make that you could sell him or hold him. But maybe for a CeeDee Lamb or a DJ Moore or DK Metcalf or something, possibly I'd trade Debo for like a running back, right? Because you might be wide receiver rich if you're looking to trade Debo.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Roster build is definitely a factor here. I think you have to kind of ride the lightning with him if you're not super deep at wide receiver, because you just got to take advantage of those points while Kittle's injured. I personally don't think that the fairy tale is going to continue throughout the rest of the season. I think we got a few more weeks of it for sure. But I think by the end of the season, Brandon Ayuk is going to have something to say there. Healthy George Kittle. And then the running backs, like you said, they're getting healthy, Ty. So they're going to start leaning on that a little bit more. And Elijah Mitchell is still looking pretty damn good in that offense. So like I said, ride the lightning a little bit with Debo. Sell him for top 12 prices if you can, but if you need him to score points for your team as you come towards these bye weeks, then definitely slot him in. I don't quite have him as a top 12 wide receiver this week, Ty. I think I've got him in like the 16 range, but he's right in there, which is more than we expected coming in the season. So you're just kind of banking with Devos Samuel at this point.
The other thing I saw is that the Colts have allowed almost every touchdown on defense this year through the air. I think Warren Sharp tweeted that out. So that was that kind of made me move Debo up even a little bit more, because I do think he's arguably the top target in end zone targets when it comes to the 49ers right now.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. That's a good point. A little bit passing in the red zone. And I think Jimmy G and his accuracy plays well into that as well. So he will be getting back healthy and looks like he will be manning the ship. So to go from Debo, who's pretty early in his career, to somebody who's considered a bit of an old man among the wide receiver landscape, Ty, he's, I know, pretty rude because he's younger than you and I are, that's for sure. So what does that make us? Am I right, bud? And that's Adam Thielen of the Minnesota Vikings. He's currently the wide receiver 12. I think we know he gets overshadowed from time to time by his top 5 counterpart in Justin Jefferson. I think we've seen in spurts a little bit less condensation from this offense, Ty, and that's not like the liquid kind of condensation. That's more like the condensation of targets into a low amount of players. I don't know why I made a condensation joke there.
Yeah,
Oh,
bye
man.
Irv Smith is what you're saying. Yeah, and
Yeah,
KJ
exactly. Well,
Osborne
that's
was
what
a
I
thing,
mean.
and then isn't a thing, and then
KJ
is a thing,
Osborne
and
has
then
shown it in spurts this season, but Adam Thielen keeps on producing. I was looking, and he doesn't blow any particular metrics like out of the water necessarily, but he just does everything well. And I think the offense in Minnesota is the perfect storm for him to produce in that manner. 4 touchdowns on the season. He's looking like a machine. Kyle in the chat says, I need to condense my jokes. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. That's a good good radio tip for condensing those jokes there. But yeah, Adam Thielen, Ty, do you think he belongs? He doesn't play in week 7. The Minnesota Vikings have a bye, so this could be a good buy opportunity for Adam Thielen, actually, if somebody needs. Like, would you sell Devos Samuel straight across for Adam Thielen? Who are you going with there?
No, I'd probably take Debo in that trade. But the thing is, Debo might be somebody who people are trying to buy high on, maybe. And Adam Thielen is somebody who's just, always undervalued. I would say, like, he's scoring as a wide receiver 1 right now. I don't think he is a wide receiver 1. Thielen's kind of a wide receiver 2, including on his own team, right behind Justin Jefferson, especially in between the 20s. But kind of our apprehension or whatever might be due to Minnesota's offensive philosophy, right? And maybe if we're not buying him, it's because of the disbelief or contempt we have in some of the stuff we're seeing in Minnesota early on. Like the Vikings have, they've been one of the fastest teams in all of football when it comes to like plays per game. They're one of the pass heaviest offenses in football,
They're getting
even
behind
in
a
neutral
lot.
game scripts. Yeah, like we did not expect it, but even in neutral game scripts,
Mhm.
the Vikings are just throwing the ball a lot more than we anticipated. And, Dalvin Cook's been injured here and there, so that might factor in. But the one thing we have been able to hang our hat on with Adam Thielen is the touchdowns, right? And I think there's a note to be made about how efficient Kirk Cousins and Adam Thielen have been, and the Vikings as a team at converting red zone trips into touchdowns going back to the beginning of last season. Like, how sustainable is that? Ask Aaron Rodgers or Ryan Tannehill, right? But for Adam Thielen, an interesting and appetizing thing happens when the Vikings get in close. Cousins just keys in on him, and he's hooked on a Thielen when they get in close, the closer to scoring they get. And I think it was on Pro Football Reference that Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson both had like over 1/4 of the team's targets inside the red zone, but inside their opponent's 10-yard line, Thielen had 50% of the team's market share. So the touchdowns aren't really fluky for Thielen. Is he behind Justin Jefferson in my rankings rest of the season? Yes, but he has that spiked week potential because of that touchdown upside. And I just think he's always undervalued. You don't have to pay very high prices for Thielen, considering what he's given you in production. Yeah, it's just been weird seeing like the pace of play in Minnesota, seeing how pass heavy they've been in the red zone efficiency. So there's lots of stuff, lots of room for some of that stuff to come back to earth. But I think a lot of that is just baked into his price. Like I always think of it like this, like Adam Thielen and Mike Evans, there's not a lot of separation between those two guys, in my opinion, when it comes to points per game, or even somebody like Tyler Lockett, who could come with a lot more down weeks than Adam Thielen. Meanwhile, Adam Thielen just doesn't muster up the same enthusiasm amongst fantasy gamers. You know what I mean? So, and lo and behold, the Vikings have just been one of the most voluminous wide receiver situations this year, which is just really, really strange. So firm wide receiver 2 rest of the season for me, maybe a guy, like you said, you target and trade, with teams having to find replacements for Adam Thielen, who heads into his bye week. So yeah, I don't mind Adam Thielen at all.
Yeah, no, I like it. I would actually take Adam Thielen over Devos Samuel the rest of the season. Just like you said, the extra volume that they're seeing in Minnesota, he's got a 22% share of that, which is, that's a nice little piece of the pie over in Minnesota. And all that red zone work, like he's going to end the season with double-digit touchdowns. I am very confident in that. Because when Kirk Cousins gets going, he is a pretty low risk, accurate passer. And I think Adam Thielen is kind of a part of Kirk Cousins being that, just the type of receiver that he is. So I would put him probably, it's hard. Like you say, it's kind of hard to put him in that top 12, but I would probably put him in that back end, kind of the 12 range, just for the, double touchdown games here and there that he might have. And the safe volume, whereas I think Debo's volume is kind of set to get taken, whereas a guy like Adam Thielen there's not like a younger guy that's KJ Osborne is not going to come in and be the wide receiver 2 for this team. He's an ancillary piece, whereas I think Devo has guys who can take over his role. So that's kind of where I sit with a guy like Thielen. Like I do play that way though, Ty. I play a little bit more conservative, so I think it really depends which way you swing where that is concerned. But I do think there is some upside with more than a Thielen. So I think that was a pretty good assessment there. Okay, a couple of guys real quick here, Ty. I want to hand the reins over to you because I've been yapping on these wide receivers quite a bit. A couple of guys, and I want you to tell me if they're still part of the elites. So we just finished talking about a bunch of players who have kind of gotten into the top 12 landscape. I want to talk about these, a couple of guys here who are not in that landscape anymore. First one being Calvin Ridley, the Riddler over in Atlanta. He's outside the top 40 wide receivers currently. And not even in the top 24 in points per game. And remember, they've had their bye as well. Do you think his shortcoming is the product of an offense that really doesn't have an identity yet? Or do we think we can safely bounce him from the ranks of fantasy's elite?
Yeah, he's definitely not an elite wide receiver anymore. And we have to change our perceptions of guys, no matter what we thought coming into the season. And it is the offense. I don't know if it's the lack of identity, but this is just one of the least efficient offenses in football this year. It's one of the least vertical offenses, like the air yards and average depth of target. That's what's drastically changed in Atlanta and for Matt Ryan under this new regime. And that sucks for Calvin Ridley. He's sitting at less than 11 air yards per target this year, down from 14.3 last season. And that really sucks for a guy who just isn't adding after the catch. Like, air yards are very important for a player like Calvin Ridley because he plays on a bad team who's not going to score a lot of touchdowns with Matt Ryan in this new regime. Right. And, with all that being said, though, like, it's hard to throw him too far down the rankings. Like, I'm just actually pulling up my rankings here, and he's a back end wide receiver in my week 7 rankings. I know Russell Gage is back, but Ridley just has a lot of volume, I think, baked into him. His Whopper is still stellar, like his weighted opportunity report. And, he gets the Dolphins this week, and they've just really struggled on that side of the ball. Wide receivers score the 3rd most fantasy points against Miami this season. So Calvin Ridley can maybe test his ceiling this week. Let's say that, Trav.
Yeah, good call.
Because, it's actually a big week all around, for this new coaching staff, everyone coming off of a bye. There's some healthy bodies here. But rest of season, I think it is that lack of wide receiver 1 overall upside is why I really don't love Calvin Ridley the rest of the way. He probably still comes with high end wide receiver 2 price tags too. And with the expected volume, maybe that's justified. I just think the perception has just changed significantly for me. So I can't really justify paying those prices for him. Yeah. And just probably not a guy I'm looking at outside of cash games, even in DFS. And also, Russell Gage is back. Daryl Patterson is on fire. So the pecking order in Atlanta is probably up for debate when you include Kyle Pitts as well. And that will be what I really have my eye on with Calvin Ridley, with all the skill players in Atlanta heading into week 7.
Yeah, I think that's really well put. Kyle Pitts just came on in that week before the bye. I think I would probably pay wide receiver, upper wide receiver 2 prices for Calvin Ridley because, me, I've been a believer in Calvin Ridley. I think not having Julio there as kind of an umbrella for him, taking that coverage has been pretty brutal on him. Not that I don't think he can overcome that, because I do think he probably will and have a good standing for us by the end of the season, but it's been rough going for those who have Ridley. I have him as, the wide receiver 2, wide receiver 1 on a bunch of teams. And there's some struggles happening out there. It's been tough. Another guy outside of the top 60, this guy is both obviously haven't had their bye, so on points per game and season long total. This one's a little bit more heartstrings for all of us, though, I think, Ty, and that would be AJ Brown from the Tennessee Titans. Has not had a good season. This offense has been in a little bit of disarray, losing Arthur Smith. It's been tough for AJB. This past week against Buffalo was the first time on the season that he'd even cleared 50 receiving yards. Still only has the 1 touchdown, which has kind of been a calling card for him. So I'm going to say, forget top 12 rest of the season for AJ Brown. Do we even see any kind of bounce back coming for AJB? Or is it just kind of a sunk ship for 2021?
No, I think he's a top 24 wide receiver.
Okay.
Definitely, he's been like even worse than Calvin Ridley for fantasy owners.
Yeah.
That's for sure. I think he has 0 top 12 finishes this year, just 1 top 24 finish in 5 games played. But, you mentioned that game against Buffalo. I thought it was really impressive. It was his best game. Scoring over 15 points in PPR against Buffalo has been really hard to do this season for wide receivers. They were extremely tough heading into that game. So that was a positive sign. And then like this week, they're facing off against the Chiefs, who've been fine against wide receivers. They've bled points to backs. Hello, Derrick Henry. Also given up a ton of fantasy points to tight ends this season. But the Titans will need to throw the ball in this matchup against the Chiefs. And it's one of the highest game totals we've seen all season. It's sitting at 57.5 right now. So the Titans will need to score points in the second half at home against the Chiefs. And A.J. Brown could easily have a blow-up game this week. But it probably is a chance to get out on him if you can, like in your home leagues. Like I'd probably be selling him because the efficiency has been borderline historic in Tennessee over the last couple of years, not just AJ Brown, but in Tennessee. And we've already seen a lot of that stuff come back to earth. Like I'm looking at Tannehill averaging about a full completed air yard less per attempt this season compared to 2019 and 2020. Touchdown rate was over 7% in the 26 starts since he took the reins in Tennessee. 3% this year. That's what his touchdown rate's sitting at. So that's led to AJ Brown just flat out busting heading into week 6. And Julio Jones is obviously around as well. So yeah, the run game this whole time is still just the well-oiled machine it's been. So no problems there. Why go to the passing game if you don't have to? And but yeah, I just think this is going to be probably a really good sell opportunity because we could see a spiked week for the passing game because of the matchup with Kansas City.
Yeah, totally. I think that's really well put. I would definitely be looking to sell coming off the big week there. If you look at the rest of his schedule after Kansas City, Indy, it's really up and down. So I think we are going to see a lot of boom or bust. Indy is there, but then you got the Rams and the Saints. Then you got the Texans, Patriots, and then Jags and Steelers looks nice with Niners and the Dolphins to round it out. So, a kind of up and down strength of schedule coming for AJ Brown. And with the kind of up and down production, I think it'd be a good time to get out for 2021. I'm still holding fast for Dynasty, though. I think we can still kind of bet on the talent where that's concerned because I don't think Julio is really going to be a factor for him long term. So AJ B is still one of my favorite wide receivers coming into Dynasty season and the off season coming. Rapid fire, Ty. I want to give you a couple of quick names here and ask you whether they can be dropped for fantasy football. It's been hard out in these wide receiver streets a little bit, and I just need to know: can I drop Laviska Shenault right now, Ty? He currently only has 1 week as a top 30 wide receiver, 0 touchdowns on the season so far. But the Jags are going to be throwing the ball.
Yeah, I think the ceiling's definitely capped for Laviska Shenault. We knew touchdowns were going to be an issue with the rookie quarterback and Marvin Jones there, but also, and that's really played out, but it's also hard to expect multiple weapons to be supported by a rookie quarterback, no matter how highly touted that quarterback is. Having said that, he did have 10 targets in week 6 in a spectacular last second win across the pond.
Yeah.
So maybe
absolutely wonderful.
So maybe he does heat up. He will score eventually too. He hasn't scored a touchdown yet this year. But yeah, I think he's like the ceiling is the concern, which makes him a tough guy to go and seek out as your wide receiver 3 or a guy to target or whatever, a flex play. So I think you can drop Shenault, especially in favor of somebody like Tim Patrick. Maybe if Rondell Moore gets dropped or Rashad Bateman, possibly somebody like that. I think I might go in a direction like that on a better offense.
Yeah, I dig it. He's a tough one for me, Shenault, because I see that double-digit target upside that could happen from week to week, but it's just kind of a tricky one to buy into, especially for somebody who likes to play with the kind of the conservative nature. The bottom of my depth chart, I want it's a tricky conundrum. So don't be afraid to risk it for the biscuit on that guy who might get less targets than Laviska, but will give you much more upside with those spike weeks because that's what you want to churn through the bottom of your roster. Next guy has previously been someone who has seen a ton of target consistency. That's kind of gone away, and part of it is due to the aforementioned Jamar Chase, and that would be Tyler Boyd. Ty, are you dropping him or are you holding on to him for that inkling of hope that the targets get a little bit more consistent?
No, I think he's droppable as well. Like in games against Chicago and Jacksonville, Boyd saw a combined 20 targets, just under 200 yards. In the other 4 games, 4 targets, 6 targets, 5 targets, 3 targets, 36 yards or less in all 4 of those games. And that's why I touched on a lot of like the red zone woes in Cincy, their ability to score more from deep. The offensive line is pass protecting, and Joe Mixon in the run game being heavily involved.
Yeah.
And then the play volume is pretty low in Cincinnati as well. So really everything is working against Tyler Boyd. And so he just isn't that needed, unfortunately. So if you feel like that's the case on your fantasy team as well, I imagine it would be to make room for some bye week fillers, likely at other positions. Like dropping Tyler Boyd probably means you're deep or you're really strong at wide receiver. So I think he's droppable as we head into week 7 where there is a lot of buys.
Yeah, no, I think that was really really good there. Another tough guy to drop too for sure. We got a big return coming, Ty, in New Orleans with the Saints. Michael Thomas is not ready to come back this week, but we're looking like we will see him the following week there. And I want to know, like, Marquez Calloway, is he somebody that you would keep on your roster just in case they start to air it out with Jameis with MT back, or are you safe cutting bait on Marquez Calloway?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think a lot of people would be more reticent to drop him other than Tyler Boyd, for instance. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, it's funny because folks drafted him high after seeing what he did with Jameis in preseason. I think he had a pair of touchdowns in that one game, and Callaway, lo and behold, had a pair of touchdowns in week 5 before the Saints went on their bye, and it was his first top 24 finish of the week of the season. Had a season high 8 targets in week 5. I think he had 13 in the first 4 games combined. And he's actually scored more fantasy points in PPR every week this season. Problem is, the Saints have been one of the least efficient offenses in football, one of the slowest offenses in football, and one of the run-heaviest offenses in football. And you add on to that, like you said, Michael Thomas coming back, Traquan Smith as well, set to return. And Callaway is always going to be like a very boom or bust option and relatively one-dimensional, just in the way he's being used. And, we hoped that wouldn't be the case heading into the season. We also thought Jameis would be attacking defenses a little bit differently, but a lot has changed, and I think Callaway belongs probably on benches or on waiver wires. And by the way, I say this with some fear. Like, my hesitance is that they have Seattle, Tampa Bay, Atlanta, and Tennessee is the next 4 opponents for the Saints. And those are 4 juicy as fuck matchups for wide receivers in fantasy.
Yeah, no, I see that. I would let him, hit the curb. I do think that Michael Thomas insertion back into the lineup is pretty much going to tank any targets that we can see Marquez Callaway getting. So I'm okay with getting rid of him. And I'd be looking at, guys like a Kendrick Bourne or even like a Khalif Raymond from Detroit, who's been performing as somebody who could kind of just has like a path to volume over Marquez Callaway for me. The last guy is a really tough one. I wouldn't drop this guy personally because I still believe, and I believe in the quarterback as well. But that's Allen Robinson, Ty. Like, can you even drop Allen Robinson, or would you be holding that roster spot for him?
Yesterday, I think everyone would have said no, but and I put this on the show sheet like a while ago when we set this up after, I think it was Sunday or Monday. And, it definitely would have seemed like a super big hot take, but yeah, because this was the week. They play Tampa Bay, a game where they will have to not play at a snail's pace, a game where they will be forced to throw the ball, and a game script just made for Allen Robinson, right? Who is in full put up or shut up mode at this point too. And the Bucs are a top 5 matchup in fantasy for wide receivers this season, but he is now questionable and did not practice today. So, fuck me. And 4 catches or fewer in 5 straight games. He has under 65 yards receiving in all 6 games this year. Allen Robinson only failed to hit 65 yards in 4 of 16 games last season. He hasn't even finished as a top 24 wide receiver in a single week this season. And this guy is still 92% rostered in Yahoo leagues. So I know people aren't dropping Allen Robinson, but I think we should be considering it.
Yeah, and the Chicago offense just doesn't really, they haven't defined a role for him. His previous red zone role hasn't been there. The target monster downfield guy has not been there. His average depth of target has been all over the place so far this season. Much like the target volume, much like the fantasy production. So like I said, I would not be dropping him, but if his stats were on a guy named Marquez Calloway, you would 100% be dropping that guy. So, keep an eye on that injury, and if you can keep a bench spot open, that's fine, but you just kind of got to ride that out with A-Rob.
So we never want to use bench spots on backup quarterbacks, right? So I want to hit some of these quarterbacks. We've hit on quarterbacks like Jalen Hurts. We talked a little Sam Darnold and Danny Dimes, but I want to zoom through some of these hard to decipher signal callers for fantasy gamers here. So Trav, I got a tough one right off the bat here. I want you to rank these guys for the rest of the season. Sam Darnold, Danny Jones, Derek Carr, Carson Wentz.
Wow. I think I got to go. I think I'm sticking with Sam Darnold just because of the Carolina offense and the weapons that are around him. I think he's my top ranked guy. And, that newfound Konami success that we've seen from him, right? The next guy, I think it's Derek Carr, and then Daniel Jones, and then Carson Wentz. It's really hard. Like, I don't know. I really don't like Daniel Jones. Some of that probably is from my Eagles fandom factor. So I think Daniel Jones might have the most upside of any of these three, just for the rushing work that he can give and his penchant for passing down the field. But I don't know. I don't trust him not to make mistakes, and those mistakes can definitely hamper his fantasy football value. So give me Derek Carr, just because the Raiders are airing it up and he is putting up some good yardage totals. And I think, Darren Waller has some room to kind of regress back to the mean and be that viable, top 3 tight end for us. Henry Ruggs has shown up and been awesome as well. I like to see that. And I think that just kind of plays into seeing some deep touchdowns for Derek Carr. So I think that's why I got him at 2. Daniel Jones, like I said, the rushing upside. Carson Wentz, like, I'm just kind of staying away. I get he can give you some spotty weeks here and there, but this is a team that relies on the backfield and not on him. And I think I would question his weapons as being ones who can help him be better than he actually is. So that's why I got Carson Wentz last. How do you have him, though, Ty?
Yeah, I've Wentz last as well. I think I have Sam Darnold at the top, Daniel Jones next, Derek Carr, Carson Wentz. Definitely, we're coming across a little bit like Derek Carr haters or non-believers or something.
Sorry,
honestly,
Tommy.
I really don't want any of these guys as my quarterback in a start 1 quarterback league. Like Darno and Danny D, I like more because they do add with their legs. And like you said, I think Darno almost lands in a tier above the others because I also kind of covet the system he plays in, and I like the weapons on top of that. But tier is the word. Like, you could argue that all 4 of these guys land in one big fat tier. You could even throw Cousins in there at the top, or Lawrence, Tannehill. I'm sure folks would have some other guys like Jameis, Matt Ryan in this mix. And I see a pretty big gap between guys like Joe Burrow, Aaron Rodgers, and a quarterback like Carson Wentz. But for fantasy, will that difference be much more than a couple points per game at the end of the season? Because I think a dozen quarterbacks or so will score within a couple points per game of one another when all is said and done. So that's kind of how I would rank them, but obviously trying to play matchups and stream guys in those scenarios.
Yeah. It's a
Trav,
tricky group.
What about Matthew Stafford? He's really coming on strong. Do you think Matthew Stafford is a legit top 10 QB1 kind of guy?
It's hard to hitch your wagon to that as a guy who's not running the ball. But I think he definitely can be. I think the Sean McVay offense has been really nice for him. Like, he's not throwing it up deep all game like he maybe once did with Detroit, but I think the touchdowns are there for him. And the deep efficiency is still there. He's third in deep yardage on passes that travel more than 20 yards down the field, but he has the 15th most attempts. So, like, I think the efficiency has come really nicely. And just the offense has been a really good piece for him. So I think he is in that area, but these weapons like Cooper Kupp still needs to be producing at a top 5 clip. Robert Woods needs to continue to build on the production that we've seen over the last couple of games. So I think he can be there. He just needs the touchdowns to remain because he doesn't have that rushing upside to hold him up against some of those younger, quicker options in like Kyler Murray and Lamar and all that jazz.
Yeah, and that's why he's been like a high floor play. You know what I mean? He's yet to finish outside the top 24, but he's only been a top 12 quarterback in 2 of 6 games. And the 2 25 plus point games have actually come against the Bucs and the Giants. Both teams are top 5 quarterback matchups for fantasy this season. So for DFS, we can target Stafford in advantageous matchups. But even absent good matchups, Stafford has provided a pretty concrete floor. And it is the system. But yeah, Stafford has also been a big part of this, like adding what the Rams have been lacking. You know what I mean? He ranks 5th in completed air yards on RotoViz and 5th in fantasy points over expectation at the position. Speaking of out kicking expectations, Kirk Cousins, I kind of touched on really quick there, on the top of that tier of quarterbacks above, definitely near the top of the quarterback twos for me. He's actually finished as a top 12 quarterback twice as often as Stafford this year, 4 of 6 weeks. But yeah, I talked earlier tonight about the idea of Cousins not finishing, top 5 in pass attempts, which is where he currently is. Like the volume has just been kind of wild, the pace of play, the play volume for the Purple People Eaters. Not to mention Cousins is converted close to 60% of his air yards. Elite stuff. But I think Cousins is interesting because the Vikings do go on bye, and maybe he can be acquired on the cheap or even for free 99 in some one quarterback leagues where people are forced to drop him. So yeah, and there's some high point total games coming up for the Vikings as well. So do you think Cousins is a quarterback who's worth going out and paying for, wasting your waiver wire claim on him, paying some fab, or do you think he is kind of in that tier going forward where you can stream guys?
Like I think he ends up being that, but I don't think I would be giving up the gusto to go and do that necessarily. I think we can get kind of replacement level production for our teams if we hit right. I just think like Kirk Cousins is probably for the most part weekly going to give us what we're hoping to hit on, you know what I mean? Or at least a safer version of that. Whereas with some of these other options, sure, Daniel Jones could give you 30, but he could give you those 6. Whereas Kirk Cousins is going to be safely in that 18 to 25 range just because of all that stuff that you alluded to. Like he's top 10 in attempts. He's top 10 in touchdowns. He is top 10 in yardage. So he's definitely just putting up the numbers, and he's not the sexy name that you're going to tie your team to. And I'm not saying go out and sell the farm necessarily for him, but if you can get him for those good prices or free 99, then definitely scoop him up. And I have a lot of teams where I'm slotting him in. He's alongside Aaron Rodgers for me on my Scott Fishbowl team, and not having him this week with that bye week is actually severely gonna hurt. So definitely attack, but attack with caution just because it is the quarterback position, right? So if you can get him thrown in on a deal or something like that, for a team who is rostering him as their second option, then great. Get him tossed in and you got yourself a locked in starter for the most part. Unless something really tanks with that Minnesota offense, which I think there is built-in safety there where it's not going to do that unless they get severely injured. So I think Kirk Cousins is that. It's just hard to buy into him as that top 12 option going forward.
But okay, Ty. This year's Tannehill, maybe.
Yeah, I like that too. I definitely like that. There's the efficiency there, and it's like even he doesn't even feel as sexy as what we thought of Tannehill that season. You know what I mean? And I think maybe
the offense is much different. Like Minnesota, it's kind of that Minnesota's just ran a lot of plays per game, and they're passing a lot. So he's top 5 in pass attempts, which I don't think we expected, and they maintained a lot of the efficiency that we've become accustomed to over the last couple of years.
Well, and I think
your heart out, Washington.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think the fact that he's been on the Vikings for a few years, putting up consistent production versus where Tannehill was brand new to that Tennessee Titans team and really unlocked something that we hadn't necessarily seen out of them. So, but I like that comparison. I was a big beneficiary of Ryan Tannehill that season. Okay, Ty. So before we get into some of these running backs, I just want to give some love to our friends over at Monkey Knife Fight. You can get in there. Our buddy Jimmy on the Gold Jacket Pods is doing some going bananas stuff every week, where we're going to be posting some screenshots of some of the games that we enter going into the Thursday nighter and the weekend. So go see our friends at Monkey Knife Fight. Put in the promo code TNFF and you will get an instant match on your first deposit of up to $50. So they'll double your cash and up to a cool hundy in the bank. And you can just have a lot of fun, any skill level, all sorts of different stuff you can get into on Monkey Knife Fight. So go check it out. Let us know what you think. Give us some feedback. Throw a tweet at us or something. and get your DFS prop games at Monkey Knife Fight with promo code TNFF. So thanks to them and all their support. We definitely love the partnership with Monkey Knife Fight and have a lot of fun winning some cheddar over there. Okay, Ty. So I'm gonna get us into these running backs. We've got some guys, a couple of guys who obviously I was pretty high on coming into this season. But I want to know if you think these guys can even be like strong running back twos for our teams. The first guy on the Darnell docket is Miles Sanders from my Eagles. He has been super, super spotty, but he's looked really good when he's been able to get some work, but it just feels like the offense hasn't let him hit a rhythm. He's looked pretty good in the passing game, even though he's been a little bit overshadowed in that facet by Kenneth Gainwell for the Eagles. But when they've run the ball consistently, Miles Sanders has looked great. There's been some holes there. Previously, we've had some issues with his vision and seeing those holes and hitting them, but I think he's improved in that area from what I've been watching as well. The volume's just been so spotty. Do you think that's what's attributed to it? And do you think it comes to make him a viable running back too, Ty? Or what are you seeing with Miles, and where would you put him on your totem pole as far as running backs are concerned?
Yeah, I mean, he's probably an RB2, right? I just think it's tough to trust him as such. It's a reflection of the state of the position. And we say that so much, but it's so true with a guy like Miles Sanders. I don't think volume's necessarily the issue. It's definitely like a lot of things that's happening with the offense. You know what I mean? And we talked during the offseason a lot about how Miles Sanders could have a hard time paying off his ADP due to a lack of involvement in the passing game, like volume-wise, in what was probably going to be a very run-heavy team. With a really low win total with just a ton of RPO action. But so far, like some of that has come to bear, but also it's just been some weird stuff happening in Philly. Like they've been one of the pass heaviest offenses in football, which I just didn't expect, or, nobody really expects that in such a heavy RPO system, being such a pass heavy team. But they've also somehow, managed to be one of the slowest offenses in football. It's really contrasting philosophies here going on. And, some of their best success is trippy too in the passing game. It's coming off of RPOs. Like the Eagles are number one in RPO pass attempts and passing yards right now. But you rarely see, passes go to the running back position in that situation, right? Same with play action. So, for me, give me guys like James Robinson, give me Daryl Henderson easily. Yeah. Like I think I'm team Josh Jacobs in 2021 over Miles Sanders, the age-old debate. So still an RB2 given the state of the position, but it's 5 straight games now where Miles Sanders has failed to score as a running back too. But again, like I want to leave this conversation by saying Miles Sanders is playing much better football than we saw a year ago. The talent is back in a big way, I think, in the receiving game. So if they just unleashed him even more in that facet of the game, then we could talk. And, if you remember, I did advocate for him last week, and I maintained that stance. Like he could start to make waves, and he already has with the team in a sense is what I'm getting at. Like it's super important to note that Miles Sanders is coming off games where he played 75% of the snaps and 83% of the snaps over the last 2 weeks, while seeing 16% and 17% of the team's targets. And last week he even saw work at the goal line. So Miles Sanders could be trending up, and you could get him on the cheap right now, but there is a lot of things happening in this offense that point towards discouraging you from buying on Miles Sanders.
Yeah, it's for me, it's really hard to trust him as that running back too. Like I think I'd probably have him ranked within the back end, but if I'm looking at my rankings for this week specifically, I got Daryl Patterson ahead of him, for crying out loud, in my weekly rankings, just because it's been so spotty. Like I don't even think the target volume has been that bad for Miles, especially with us expecting Kenneth Gainwell to eat into that a little bit. I mean, he's probably averaged about 4 targets per game, which with the efficiency we want from Miles Sanders is totally fine. For me, it's been the fact that he's had a game with only 2 carries and a game with 7 carries, a game with 9 carries. His season high is 15. And I just think it's been that's where we want to see more volume. And I think he can capitalize on those 4 targets per game, but it's hard to trust a guy as a running back too, for me, that could have, 3 carries in a game. I think the running back landscape means that you are starting him as a running back too. All these injuries this week, we got Kareem Hunt, Nick Chubb, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley's out. Like there's just injuries galore that mean you're probably having to start Miles Sanders as a running back too. But I think, I think it's not necessarily the rose-colored glasses that I would like to be viewing my Eagles with, Ty. So off that note, which is super sad, how about Damian Harris over in New England? Do we think that he's a strong running back too for fantasy football? Ramondre Stevenson was a little bit more involved this past week. James White is still out with that injury. What's your take on Damian Harris and his viability from week 7 on to be a running back too for our teams, even, sans some of that passing work that we might have liked to see him get with James White out?
Yeah. Is he an RB2? Sure. Rest of the season. Like he is what he is. You know what I mean? Like he's still yet to score over 20 fantasy points in a game during his career, but he's coming off a career high day against Dallas. So good for him. And this week they get the Jets. So I'd straight up entertain Damian Harris as an RB1 in such a juicy matchup this week. But even in a career day last week, he still couldn't get over 50% of the team snaps. So he is game script dependent, and that can come with big down weeks, right? And he still splits work at the goal line with others. So this week, yes. Running back 2 rest of season, yes. But is he a top 20 running back for me rest of the way? I just don't think he is. Like, it's hard to trust a guy who comes with a lot of down weeks, but has also never scored 20 points in fantasy ever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And you know me, like I've previously been a Damian Harris guy, but I think we've just kind of seen that his upside's a little bit capped and the offense is going to use multiple guys. He's I still like him. And if he is a run, like I think he probably is in that top 24, but like you said, is he in that top 20 rest of the season? Probably not for me.
And we chase fantasy points from the Patriots backfield, almost erroneously throughout the years because they're such defined roles. And that's why I point out the snap counts and stuff in New England, because the defined roles are still very much there. And that makes him game script dependent, and as explosive of a running back as I might think Damian Harris is, as good as I think he is after contact and everything. He really is fighting the situation. He isn't even getting the goal line work. And this offense isn't a powerhouse by any means with Mac Jones under center. So it's just a really tough sell for Damian Harris, who I will admit that after this week, we could be saying this guy's coming off back-to-back career high fantasy weeks, and this team will build yet again with Damian Harris.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely could. And it's just a shame that we haven't seen him be able to siphon some of that passing work. Like you said, with this team not necessarily having those defined roles, I thought he was going to be able to take some of that with James White down, because I think Damian Harris has some of that in his game. I think he could be a good pass catching back if they gave him some targets. But yeah, it's been an interesting shakeout for that New England backfield as they approach new territory with Mac Jones at the helm. Couple more here, Ty. Leonard Fournette, is he a running back 1 for you rest of the season? He's getting the work. He's the running back 11 in PPR currently for Tampa Bay. Rojo is a figment of our imagination at this point, and Gio's taking a couple targets here and there, but nothing that worries us. Where are you at with Lenny?
Yeah, he is really heating up. 16 points in week 4, 21 in week 5, and over 30 points in PPR against your Eagles last week. But that was his only top 12 performance through 6 games last week. And in typical Leonard Fournette fashion, he's outside the top 40 in running back fantasy points over expectation. His yards per carry suck. So this is almost all situation and volume, but he does have like both those extremely important elements in his game right now. Like he's 6th in running back opportunities, 7th in running back targets, 6th in receptions amongst running backs. So there's not much to argue with outside of efficiency right now. I just have a hard time thinking of Fournette as an RB1 in such a pass heavy offense. Plus a lot of this receiving work has come while Gio Bernard has been sidelined. But the Bucs are also one of the fastest offenses in football, one of the most efficient offenses in football, one of the highest scoring offenses in football. So you probably want the lead back in that situation, who is seeing about 60% of the team carries, and the lead back at the goal line. And we've continued to say that Tampa Bay could yield a league-winning running back, especially when you look at that playoff fantasy strength of schedule.
Yeah, well, and I think the reason why Leonard Fournette hasn't been hampered by the pass happiness of this offense is that he's been getting a decent amount of targets. He's averaging just over 4 per game. And in all but one game where both were active, he has actually out-targeted Giovanni Bernard. So I think, we were pretty worried that Gio was going to come in and be the apple of Tom Brady's eye, but it seems like Leonard Fournette has that and is going to get some of those targets to go along with it. So I think he probably will be for the season. I'd have to take a peek at my rest of the season rankings here to see if I'd put him right in there, but he would be definitely a top 15 or so with that running back one upside, because it's Tom Brady and I almost said the Patriots and the Bucks here.
Yeah, don't consider him an RB1, but I could
Yeah.
see him being an RB1 and even a league winner at some point during down the stretch.
Yeah, good point. What about Daryl Hendo? Sony Michel in Los Angeles has not been a factor for Daryl Henderson necessarily, which has been very good to see. And Daryl Henderson has taken full advantage of the opportunity that he's been getting in this Rams offense. Is he a running back one, would you say, going forward, or even if you want to put the threshold at top? Yeah, I like it. Top 12, Daryl Hendo, baby.
Like Derrick Henry, Dalvin, Alvin, Eckler, Aaron Jones, Najee, probably guys like Nick Chubb, Zeke, Jonathan Taylor, Joe Mixon, Christian McCaffrey, maybe still, maybe DeAndre Swift. So I could probably squeeze Hendo out. But for right now, there's no question he is entering that running back one conversation. He was back up to 81% of the snaps last week, saw the goal line work as well for the Rams, and Derek is the total opposite of Leonard Fournette, Trav, and that shows up in things like fantasy points scored over expectation. Hendo is on the high end of that spectrum, and in all 5 games that he's played this season, he scored at least 15 PPR points, and yeah, that makes Daryl Henderson like a top 10 running back, at least in terms of points per game right now. So I am 100% sold on Daryl Henderson.
I like it. I really, really like it. I think, he's just he's continued to build the trust of Sean McVay, which is something that I think we kind of thought was on thin ice for him with Cam Akers looking to get the job. And we weren't sure what they were going to do with Sony Michel being brought in. We thought that was an indictment against Daryl Henderson, but it turned out to not necessarily be, or maybe it's an indictment against Sony that Sony hasn't been used very much since he got there. But I'm going to choose to see it with a glass half full lens for Daryl Henderson, because we thought this coming in, and you've been a big proponent of him since he was drafted, Ty, and then I picked up steam, and I was loving him coming into this season, and he's just done it for us. So you like to see those guys, because sometimes we just ditch guys a little bit earlier than I think they deserve, Ty. Daryl Henderson's in his 3rd season. He was a 2nd round running back. And I remember one show you just listed off a litany of things where he was like top of the class for his running back class. And he didn't get the respect he deserved. So I personally kind of like those guys, and I don't like seeing guys written off too early. And so the opportunity has been taken advantage of by Daryl Hendo. So last guy here, I got one more, Ty. One more, and he's a cherry on top. I'm sorry to cut you off. Daryl Patterson, you mentioned him earlier. Is he even a running back? And at that, is he I'm not going to say running back one, because I think, like I said, he's just a bit of a cherry on top player. But do you think we can rely on him as a top 24 running back rest of the season?
Oh, yeah, I think so for sure. I mean, he was the running back 3 overall heading into their bye week last week, and at least 5 catches and 58 yards receiving in 4 straight games now, which is like double-digit fantasy points as it is. And coming out of their bye, Atlanta faces Miami, who are a top 5 matchup for running backs in fantasy this season. And as much as we may have considered this kind of like a flash in the pan or a glitch in the running back matrix for fantasy or whatever, like Patterson had a career high 14 carries in week 5 and played a season high 59% of the snaps. And that was against the Jets, right? Like a game the Falcons won. So it wasn't even like a game they were down big and just had Patterson in there for pass catching purposes. For sure. Like RB1, like you said, that's hard to confess to for Cordero, but I think he's an awesome running back too for the time being, and we might even see him get more involved more creatively, even coming out of the bye with this new coaching staff, who probably didn't really know what they had on their hands. But as we talked about during Calvin Ridley, like the pecking order just has a very wide range of outcomes right now in Atlanta between Calvin Ridley, Kyle Pitts, and Cordero, and how involved is Russell Gage and some of the ancillary pieces. And I kind of refuse to accept that Mike Davis will just go away. I think he should still see some work in the passing game. But bottom line, it will be very hard for Patterson to maintain a 16% target share for the rest of the season. So if somebody offers me top 12 prices for Patterson, I'll bite. I'll give up the dream, but he seems like a hold if there ever was one, and just enjoy the ride.
Yeah, I am certainly doing that myself.
So I was going to jump in there just because I saw the transition there from Daryl Henderson to Tony Pollard so smoothly, talking about that fantastic Memphis system. But I do want to talk about Tony Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott with the Cowboys really scoring a lot of points from the running back position. Do you think the Cowboys will produce multiple top 24 running backs this year? Like Zeke is the running back 4 overall right now. Tony Pollard is the running back 19.
Yeah, and I think it's really tough to say, but I think with the landscape that we've seen, I think they definitely will. Tony P is extremely efficient on the work that he does get. And I think they're going to continue to use him in this creative fashion to make him a top 24 running back for us. And you love to see it out of Tony P. Hey, Ty?
Absolutely. And I think this Cowboys offense, like, I think it's definitely a lot of Zeke, right? Like, it's just been such a powerhouse in this backfield. Like, they're one of 3 teams averaging over 30 points per game in fantasy from just the running back position. And I think that Cowboys are just still being an underrated offense. Like, they lead the NFL in yards per play, and per game, they're running the most plays. So it's a pretty remarkable offense that we should want to be attached to. I was looking at it like, the Browns, Titans, and Cowboys are forming this like running back tier atop the league. It's just crazy. And the Titans and Browns have both scored 10 running back rushing touchdowns. The Cowboys have only scored 6. So we could even see touchdowns a little bit more going forward. But yeah, fastest offense, most efficient offense, one of the highest scoring offenses, and they're running the ball a lot. And that's a recipe for multiple fantasy relevant running backs, right? The scale is just like we can't mistake how much the scale is tipping in favor of Zeke right now, though, particularly at the goal line too. But I do love like how complementary their skill sets are, so to speak. You know, like Zeke is still doing his thing, top 5 in running back opportunities, rush yards, touchdowns. He's 6th in expected fantasy points. Meanwhile, Tony Pollard ranks 7th on RotoViz in fantasy points over expectation. So, you know, Tony Pollard can have those spiked weeks here and there. It's going to be hard to predict when they come. But I think Zeke is definitely one of the best running backs in fantasy right now.
Yep. No, I think you're spot on with that. That being said, there, I think it's just a testament to your boy Kellen Moore, actually, in that Michael Gallup goes down. You know, they're not hucking it to all these wide receivers. They're using Tony Pollard more creatively. They're using Dalton Schultz and the tight ends a little bit more creatively. So shout out to your boy Kellen Moore for keeping the production going, just doing it a different way, right? And it's still been fruitful for fantasy football. We just haven't seen it as the, robust wide receiver attack. We've seen it as a very multifaceted attack in Dallas.
Yeah, even though CeeDee Lamb definitely coming on strong, Dalton Schultz still life of the party.
My boy, right, Ty? My boy Dalton Schultz.
Speaking of your boy, maybe we'll talk some RSJ here because I want to go to the Cowboys' division rivals, Washington. Touch on the backfield first, though, because Antonio Gibson didn't practice today. Just banged up all year, it feels like. Yeah. And just not getting the role in the passing game that we had hoped for. He's under 19 yards receiving in all but one game. The one game that he wasn't was the game he had that long touchdown reception. And he has just 12 catches in 6 games. And then J.D. McKissic has played his role very well this year, stepped up when needed. So how are you treating this backfield, factoring in that Logan Thomas and Curtis Samuel are still unavailable?
Yeah, well, I think it's going to kind of remain one of those. Antonio Gibson should be the main runner and get a few targets here and there, with J.D. McKissic soaking up more targets per game with those other guys being out. And I think he's going to continue to siphon those targets because he's been super effective. He had a game-winning touchdown on a target against, I think it was the Detroit Lions. And I love J.D. McKissic as one of those guys who can be that for them. Like, I think Curtis Samuel, the way they were going to use Curtis Samuel is probably just being eaten up by J.D. McKissic himself. And then depending on what happens with that calf for Antonio Gibson, I think I saw something earlier in the week where he was going to see a specialist about it or something like that. So that's not looking too good. So we definitely want to see what they do with him. Hopefully it's not a situation where they decide to shut him down or anything like that. But I think top 24 for both of these guys, I would say no. I think we could see JD McKissic taking over as the guy that we want down the stretch, though, for the Washington football team. And that's just a little bit of a spicy take for me. But I just think with that Gibson injury looking like it's serious business, the McKissic bandit might be the guy we want.
Yeah, especially in a game
fucking
Green Bay where
RSJ.
they're yeah, no kidding. Yeah, RSJ has lighted up, playing a ton, running a ton of routes. He's bona fide right now. Well, Thomas is out. Logan Thomas is out, and JD McKissic, like against Green Bay, especially, this is a really good matchup as well. I'm gonna have him ranked really high, probably higher than Antonio Gibson, factoring in that he could be limited in this one. And not too far down is the next backfield I want to touch on. That's Cleveland, who are going into Thursday nighter against Denver, really banged up. So what are you doing with D'Ernest Johnson? Are you rolling him out there? Are you rolling out any other Cleveland running back? And before I forget, Jared Patterson, make sure you're picking up Jared Patterson in Washington.
Yeah.
But D'Ernest Johnson, probably number one waiver guy this week, possibly. So are you rolling him out there right away as like a top 24 guy?
Not as a top 24 guy. I am starting McKissic just over him, actually. I'm looking at my rankings here, Ty, and that was a funny one in my rankings. When I saw D'Ernest Johnson, I was thinking, okay, well, Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb are both top 12 weekly backs pretty much. So obviously D'Ernest Johnson's going to be up there, but the matchup against Denver's not great. We don't necessarily know that he's going to get the full pie with Demetric Felton in there. And we've kind of been on this. Obviously, it was last season, but we've been on the D'Ernest Johnson train before, and there's a bit of a sour taste left in our mouth after last season because he did not come to fruition for the few games that we wanted him to. Not to say that that's going to translate over into this season, but I definitely this week would start JD McKissic over him. I have D'Ernest Johnson as the running back 29 for this week for me, and I just think it's going to be a really tough bet against that Denver team on Thursday night. I think better days could be ahead for D'Ernest Johnson in the couple weeks following, depending. I think Nick Chubb's going to be back, but I think Kareem Hunt's looking like a few weeks out, so we're going to see. If Nick Chubb takes on all of this role or if D'Ernest Johnson takes some of that pass catching from him. But yeah, I would not be starting him as a top 24 option for me, even for the next few weeks while Kareem Hunt might be out. I would try to pivot if I need to rely, but the spike weeks could definitely happen because it's the Cleveland running game, right?
Yeah, we're maybe going to talk some of the passing game with a lot of things to monitor there for the Browns as well, but we're running a bit long, and there's a perfect segue here anyways, because I want to talk about the Seattle backfield. Alex Collins is probably right in this range as well in your running back rank, so does he fall above or below those two guys we just talked about?
Alex Collins is, this week, he's 2 spots behind D'Ernest Johnson. Yeah, I think I probably would have D'Ernest Johnson a little bit ahead of Alex Collins because Rashad Penny is set to return. Obviously, think what you will about that, but he's a warm body who is supposedly going to be healthy. And then DJ Dallas has flashed a little bit with some of his work, and I think he's the guy that I'm most intrigued about.
He had 9 or 10 touches last week.
Yeah, he's the guy that I'm most intrigued about just because he's got a little bit of juice. He's a bit of that bowling ball style of runner, and I like that out of him. So I think he's the guy who could give you some of those kind of big plays. Obviously, Rashad Penny, but we're a little bit trepidatious just trying to see him coming back from yet another injury. But I would put Alex Collins behind D'Ernest Johnson, and I have him as the running back 31 for this week.
Yeah, totally. What about Chuba Hubbard, who we, of course, had the pleasure of interviewing on this podcast? Scroll down in the feed.
Absolutely. Yeah, make sure you scroll down and check that out. We had a great time chatting with Chuba. It was a really, really cool opportunity that came to us from our friends at DAZN Canada. So thanks again to them. Chuba is a couple of tiers above those other guys for me, Ty. I just think he's locked into a large majority role for the Carolina Panthers, who's an offense that we like to have pieces of. So Chuba, for me, I've got him. He's a top 15 running back for me this week. Right now, I have him at 11. I have him at 11, which feels a little bit high. So I'm going to go and look at that. But now that I look at the names behind him, I'm not sure if that's necessarily too spicy at running back 11 for Chuba. So he's locked in there for me. Some pass catching work. He's getting the rushing work as well. So lock it up. Chuba is, he's representing for us Northerners, man.
No, totally. And the Giants have allowed the 7 most points to the running back position. I know the game has like a 43-point total, but there's a lot of low point total games this week. We can't be beggars can't be choosers in all situations, especially at the running back position right now. So yeah, I think he's a borderline RB1 this week for sure.
Yeah. I like that. Now that you say that, Ty, I got we were talking about some of these kind of shorter term injury fill-in backs. I got a couple more names for you before we ride out, if that's cool. First one is going to be your boy Daryl Williams in Kansas City. He is filling in for also your boy Clyde Edwards-Helaire while he tries to get back. I think his earliest possible return is week 9 for Clyde the Glide, so got a couple more weeks of Daryl Willie. Is he in that Chuba tier, would you say, or is he more towards the Alex Collins tier for you?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think he's way higher than all those guys for sure. I have him as like my running back 8, I think, this week. I like Derrick Henry, Alvin Kamara, Joe Mixon, Aaron Jones, Daryl Henderson, Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift, Daryl Williams against Tennessee.
Same for me.
And, you know, we're talking about these low point total games, and yeah, it just can't be lost on people that a 57.5 point total game for the Chiefs and Titans is just off the charts this week.
Yeah, no, I like that. And it's interesting because the Chiefs have last week they used Daryl Williams in the role that we wanted to see them use Clyde Edwards-Helaire in, which is super, super interesting. The last guy I got, Ty, is Khalil Herbert in Chicago. Damian Williams is set to come back. But what do you think about Khalil Herbert? He had a really good week this past week filling in. Do you think he can have some value for us going forward, or is he, someone who you would be, parking on that bench again?
Yeah, I am definitely sitting Khalil Herbert. As impressed as I've been over the last 2 weeks, and as much as I might think he might be the back to own in Chicago in the short term until David Montgomery comes back, it's just such a tough matchup going to Tampa Bay this week. So I just think it's as simple as that. I just have him outside my top 24. I'd be starting guys like Javonte Williams, Dearness Johnson, Miles Sanders, Michael Carter, Melvin Gordon. So I'm both Broncos backs starting over any Bears back. So a really tough sell. And I'd definitely be looking to pivot off Khalil Herbert this week.
Yeah, same here. I've got him a few spots below Alex Collins, who I had at the bottom of that tier that we were talking about. So seems like we're kind of in lockstep there. The Bears offense just isn't, like we talked about, Allen Robinson. If his name wasn't Allen Robinson, we would be dropping the stats that he'd produced this year. And I think that kind of just reigns true for this whole Chicago offense. So with that, Ty, you mentioned we were running a bit long. We are still under $1.50 here. But I just want to say thanks to everybody for listening. We really appreciate all the people who love our work. We've been getting some good support out there on the socials and whatnot. Ty got some really good love, like I said, off of that number 4 ranking as far as rankers. So congrats again to you for that. I know that you've been putting in some work on those rankings, Ty, and I hope to get one of those finishes one of these weeks coming up here. But yeah, just want to make sure everybody goes and subscribes to the YouTube channel. That's the big one. We are right about, I checked earlier today, we're at 349 subscribers. So hitting that big 350 would be pretty sweet. And then 4, and then 450, and then 5, and let's just keep her rolling, baby. So thanks to everybody for that. Thanks to our friends at Fantasy Points. And all of the groups in Fantasy Points Media Group. Thanks to Monkey Knife Fight for their support, Viridian Global. Didn't get a Trophy Smack read in, but we love them. I got the belt behind me. There is still time to take your league to the next level. They got tons of trophies and stuff, and that promo code is TNFF. So just lots of love for True North going on in the community, Ty. And so I want to appreciate people for that. Of course, you and I will be back, same bat time, same bat channel next week. Going to be getting us ready for, we're going to be a little deeper in that midseason run. And I hope everybody wants to ride with the True North Fantasy Pod as they make those runs. So you got any parting shots for the people here, Ty?
Nope. Just make sure you check out Sons of DFS tomorrow. And just thanks to guys like Kyle, Nate, Coach Craig in the chat, always keeping pace. So much love. And
love that.
Yeah, see you guys next week.
Absolutely. Peace.